It's 1963, and whilst the world is in shock from Kennedy's assassination, Doctor Who slips quietly into the BBC schedules with one episode of surreal police boxes and 3 episodes of grunting cavemen. It's not till the 5th episode, when the Doctor and his companions discover a deserted city on a radiation-soaked planet, that the audience really sits up and takes note. It's fairly well known that The Dead Planet wasn't always supposed to be the second story, and Lost and Found has already done a 2-part look at the Masters of Luxor, where the suspicion is that we might have had a lucky escape. You might think that was the end of the story, but Lost and Found has a new journey planned, one that's going to take us to the crack between the universes and look at a halfway house. It's time for Lost and Found to become, well, lost and glimpsed, and take a look at the outline of Terry Nation's first attempt to put man on Skaro. Doctor Who is one of those shows that inspires books and reading. Some of the books are exceptionally highly regarded, and rightly so. Others are lesser known for some reason, but do still contain the occasional gem. In 1988, and written before it could even contain information about Remembrance of the Daleks, the official Doctor Who and the Daleks book was released for the American market. Mostly, it was a very conventional affair, with standard things like episode guides, brief details about the movies and stage shows, etc. The book wasn't exactly brilliantly well received, and usually languishes on the forgotten book pile. However, tucked away towards the back of the book is the original outline that Terry Nation gave the BBC for his story, The Survivors, which would eventually become The Dead Planet, or whatever we're supposed to be calling it this week. At the end of this episode of Lost and Found is a full reading of it, so that you can get everything in context, and you'll get to hear a lot more of the similarities with the story as it was eventually shown. For those who prefer the abbreviated version, though, let's go through some of the more interesting differences, including a whole new ending, because they're a fascinating glimpse of what we were spared and what we lost out on. And those differences begin on the second line. Okay, it might be a minor thing, but given how the Dalek timeline ends up as we go through the next 60-odd years, it would have been very useful to have the detail from the original draft that the story takes place in the year 3000. We get an idea of the timescale of Skaro's history littered throughout the draft, and, had it been stuck to in any way, we might have had to do an awful lot of explaining in order to get the Daleks to invade in the 22nd century, had they even returned. Being a draft, we don't get any information about just exactly why the TARDIS and its crew are on Skaro, but it's probably reasonably safe to assume they got there the same way as in the broadcast version, i.e. by accident. In the draft, the jungle has a very similar feel to the version we know, but when it comes to it, Susan, for example, takes several attempts to pick a flower and keep it in one piece. Presumably the final version has her doing it right the first time, so to save on cost. Whether or not there would have been time to do a scene with multiple attempts is questionable at best, as, if anything, the draft version of the first episode has a lot more wandering around in it. The Doctor, who's mostly referred to as Doctor Who throughout, is definitely his inquisitive self, with a stubborn streak. But it's interesting to note that Ian and Barbara think they have an equal say in what happens, when they try to convince the Doctor that democracy says he's outnumbered and they should leave the planet. Without the full dialogue and the actor's delivery, we can only guess at what the relationship between the Doctor and the companions would have turned out like. But Ian definitely feels as though he's more dominant in this version. Whilst the structure of the first episode is mostly the same as we saw on television, some of the fine details are significantly different. It's not a fluid link, it's a liquid fuse, and rather weirdly, rather than mercury, it's filled with water. And strangely, It's Ian who seems to authoritatively say that there's no water on the ship. There's no food machine sequence in the draft which would back this idea up, but it does seem weird that Terry Nation thinks a spacecraft would have no water on board at all. Then again, this is Terry Nation who thinks that the TARDIS relies on the outside air to keep its occupants alive in Planet of the Daleks, and presumably, to keep it tea time friendly, other rather obvious sources of liquid don't cross anyone's mind. As a side note though, it does feel more likely that a city would have water in it than a handy supply of mercury, which might explain where that aspect of the final version came from. When the travellers arrive at the city on television, they arrive in a rather generic area with doors. But in the draft, we discover that the Dalek city originally had shops, and they were shops with foodstuffs for sale. Combine this with Barbara explicitly wandering through a room full of sculptures. It gives you a real sense that Terry Nation wanted his creations to feel as though they have a history that was wiped out in the war. And to me, this is a genuinely important touch that I think the final version skimmed over. And who knows, one day we might have seen this parallel universe version of the series visit the pre-war Skaro and see some of this art. Maybe even show us Dalek money? There's a slight juggling of running order, as the Doctor, Ian and Susan discover the Geiger counter before Barbara is menaced, though I can see this getting moved into episode 2 to accommodate the various extra bits we've already had. And this brings us to what would probably be the cliffhanger of part 1. Structurally, it's identical. Barbara's been taken down in a lift, and something approaches her. However, it's here that we start to realise just how important Raymond Cusick is, as it's not a strange sink plunger type affair that menaces Barbara, but a pair of grotesque arms move out to encircle her. Throughout the draft version, there's very little description of the Daleks, which are often referred to as he when talking about one of them, and later on, there's going to be even more confusion over how they were originally envisaged. But a pair of arms doesn't really fit with any machine creature references through the story. Episode 2 continues much as on the television, though Ian apparently suspected the Doctor's deception all along, which definitely ties in with Ian being sold as the lead character. When the Doctor's taken to be questioned by the Daleks, we get a reference to the Dalek city seemingly being powered by water, which, thankfully at this stage, is clearly just a sound effect in the background, but later on, the story would require running water on the sets, which, yes, in 1960s terms, screams, we'll cut this scene and do something else. And, most importantly of all, the Daleks genuinely think the Thals started the war 2,000 years previously, that the Doctor and his friends are Thals, and in a radical departure from the creatures we know as Daleks, these parallel universe Daleks plan to put the intruders on trial. Susan is still the one chosen to go to the TARDIS to collect the drugs for the end of part 2, but interestingly, not only does she treat herself with the drugs before heading back to the city, but she arms herself with a massive spanner when she leaves the ship. Clearly, Susan isn't the helpless screamer that she eventually became in reality. Episode 3 is largely the same, except there's no indication that Susan signed the letter, and the Dalek seemingly freely lets on that they plan to kill all the Thals when they arrive. The episode ends not with a claw emerging from underneath a cloak, but apparently we would have got to see a glimpse of the full creature from inside the Dalek, and it's simply described as frog-like. Now, whether or not you want to picture just literally a giant frog, or something with bulging eyes and maybe flappy legs, that's up to you. But I certainly think the television version, where we don't see it all in full and we just get a slight hint of it, I think that probably would have been far scarier than anything that would have inevitably been just some kind of child's toy thrown onto the ground. The descriptions of the Daleks that are spread across episodes 3 and 4 are, well, interesting isn't quite the word, I think baffling is more appropriate. Ian is said to climb into the machine suit when he passes himself off as a Dalek. And then, when they try and get the lift up to a higher level, he can't get out, not because of magnetism, but because one of the locking nuts has twisted too tight. The only reason he doesn't join the others in the lift and deal with the nut later on is lack of space. It's up to the imagination as to what the machine creatures would look like, but assuming the same production crew, it ties in with the size of the Dalek compared to the size of the lift being the same as in the show. But what a Dalek would be doing with locking nuts on the inside of a lid, machine suit, is less than clear. At the end of the episode, we still have the revelation that the liquid fuse, is down in the city, but thanks to a few minor changes earlier on, it's not Ian that lost the liquid fuse, but the Doctor. Other than that, though, the sentiment is pretty much the same, the horrid realization that they've got to make their way back into the city somehow. Characters start to divert a bit more in episode 5. We don't have Ian's televised method for getting the Thals to fight on their behalf. There's no threatening to take the history, there's no threatening to take the females. It seems as though the Thals just agree to do it. There's also no attempt made by the Daleks to experiment with the drugs, which for the 60s is not a sentence you thought you'd ever hear, but it also means that they don't realise the drugs are poisonous to them. This means there's no countdown to detonating a new neutron bomb, and it does remove a certain lack of urgency from the original version. In the Survivors version, Barbara wasn't originally going to be in the mountaineering group, but seemingly joined it because she had the hots for one of the Thals. Certainly there isn't really an indication that Terry Nation seems to be thinking along the lines of an Ian and Barbara relationship at this point. The mountaineering group is also a lot larger in the original draft, but we still lose one of them to the swamp, probably ending the episode. The early version also seems to want the lake to have a lot more mutations in it than we eventually saw on screen. Again, sadly, it's highly likely that whatever Terry Nation intended, the budgets department would have stepped in and said no. And that brings us to episodes 6 and 7. Get ready for some big changes that clearly show that Terry Nation was thinking along the sort of perils that Flash Gordon faced, rather than a BBC studio could provide. The reason the mountaineering group was larger in this original draft is because it suggests there's a lot more dangers. One of them is random jets of flame. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that the sets, the props, and let's face it, Barbara's hair, were probably going to be pretty flammable. I don't think the budget saying yes or no would have been an issue. I think health and safety might have said, "Do you want your actors to survive to the end of the episode?" Well, we could have had regeneration a bit early, I suppose. However, this version does feel as though he wanted a lot more excitement and adventure than we got in the final version. However, time, resources, and yes, budget probably would have meant that we got something similar to the jumping the chasm scene that we got on television. After all, the Survivors synopsis does still suggest that there is a rope cutting scene, but it's not really immediately apparent if that would have been the cliffhanger. Back with the Doctor and the remainder of the Thals, they don't use reflected light to get into the city. Instead, the Doctor intends to block the air vents. One of the big things of this story is that they make a big thing of the city being underground. Whatever method they use to get in, both he and Susan still end up captured, and I think that the Doctor and Susan being tortured with sound would have been the stronger cliffhanger than anything involving a piece of rock crumbling under Ian's hand. It's also interesting to note that in the TV version, none of the episodes end with the Doctor in direct danger, something the show would come to rely on over the years. Certainly, a moment of peril for this character would tie in with the Saturday morning serial that the story aspires to, especially if the rope cutting had already happened. That would then leave a whole episode for a very different ending. Yes, Ian eventually disables the Daleks, but then the Thals are far too trusting of them, and the Daleks fight back. So far, not a huge departure in terms of character, but just a slight enhancement to the plot. However, in this draft version, the Daleks and the Thals end up making peace because they learn that a third party had actually started the war, and that the third party is about to turn up out of the blue to sort things out. Seriously, listen to the reading of the full draft at the end of this podcast to get the full and only ever so slightly balmy details. So that does raise the important question. Was the grass greener? It's really difficult to say. We don't have a script, we don't have performances, and we don't have the assurance that we would have had the same look and feel to the design of things. And it's that really that kept the series alive rather than the plot. Whether or not this version would have had the same creative team we can't say, though I would like to have seen their take on Dalek shops. But for the first 5 episodes or so, it is sufficiently similar to the broadcast version to assume that it probably would have looked pretty much identical. The eventual TV version ends with the dramatic countdown, the assault on the city, and the defeat of all the Daleks. That, as history shows, didn't seem to hamper them coming back with monotonous regularity. This initial version has the Daleks very much alive at the end, and seemingly not as evil as our Daleks. There's nothing to actively stop the Daleks turning up after this one, though, and turning into the pepper pots that we know and hate. In the Dalek invasion of Earth, it seems that long before the Dead Planet, Daleks left Skaro in search of power, conquest, and merchandise deals, so there's nothing to say that these alternative versions wouldn't have done the same. The alternate version of Episode 7 still shows that they have a really nasty streak. The fact they have a torture chamber, like the shops and statues, is certainly something that could be explored more. Plus, and here's the real bonus, we have a whole new third race of aliens to factor in. The synopsis, as presented in the book, gives absolutely no description of this third group. But as the story suggests they come from another planet, would we have settled for humanoids, which would have been very similar looking to the Thals, or something new? Yes, they're in half an episode, so at the tail end of the budget, it's strange to think that we could have had some... Oh, it's Terry Nation. It would have been the Vord a few stories early. Men in rubber suits. But then again, we still have the Vord on audio to this day. It's worth thinking, though, that this third alien race have a history, seemingly, of interfering, bombing with unknown reason, and therefore they're actually ideal for a potential return themselves. How many other planets did they do this to? Without a complete script, without direction and real visuals, it's very difficult to know how well this story would have been received. After all, if you draft out the plot of the television version, then it's also probably not going to sound anything other than reasonably cliché-ridden. So, for the remainder of this Lost and Found, here's the full-blown synopsis to give you a chance to decide whether or not this original version would have ignited the imagination or put a dampener on the show before it took off. Forget the Masters of Luxor, the survivors are the Masters of Skaro. The Survivors, a storyline for the Doctor Who series by Terry Nation. The planet is Skaro, the year 3000. When Doctor Who and his companions arrive on Skaro, they find it presents a scene of utter desolation. All plant life is in the stage of petrification. The soil is barren. Susan, Barbara and Ian are eager to move on to some other time. Doctor Who, however, is anxious to explore. The dense jungle around them, though now petrified, suggests that the planet was once very fertile. This being so, says Doctor Who, the chances are that animal life existed here. Reluctantly, the others agree to a short exploration. The plant life is all perfectly preserved, but crumbles to dust at a touch. Beautiful flowers dissolve to ash. Trailing vines crack like icicles. As darkness approaches, they turn back toward the ship, having seen no sign of life. Doctor Who advances some reason for the death of the planet. Just before the light fails, Ian climbs a small ridge. His shout brings the others to his side. Far below in the valley is a city. Examined through field glasses, it shows no sign of decay, nor does it offer any suggestion of life. They agree that they will go to look at the city the next day, having spent the night in the ship. It is quite dark as they thread through the jungle. Susan sees a very attractive petrified flower and determines to pick it up and preserve it in one piece. Her first few attempts shatter the flowers. With great care she tries again. Meanwhile, the others have drawn well ahead of her. Finally, Susan succeeds. Then, with the flower cradled in her hands, she becomes aware that someone or something is standing behind her. A hand reaches out and touches her face. With a scream of terror, she runs after the others. Inside the ship, they try to calm her. They suggest the hand was no more than a leaf or a vine brushing against her face. Susan cannot be convinced. They settle down to an uneasy sleep and are awakened by a scratching and a tapping outside the ship. In the darkness, they can see nothing of whatever is making the eerie noise. Apart from Doctor Who, all are convinced they should leave Skaro at once. Doctor Who argues that they must try to contact whatever life remains on the planet and discover what caused its destruction. There is a general ganging up against Doctor Who becomes very stubborn. Ian and Barbara preach at him about democratic rights and the wishes of the majority. Eventually, Doctor Who appears to capitulate. He moves to the controls and fiddles for a moment, then attempts to start the ship. It fails, as do further attempts. He strips an instrument and says he has found the fault. A leak in a liquid fuse. He baffles the others with a flow of technical jargon, coming finally to the fact that the fuse has to be refilled with fluid. Water would do, he says. Ian points out that there is no water in the ship, and they have seen no sign of any in the jungle. Barbara plays into Doctor Who's hands when she suggests that there must be water in the city. During the rest of that sleepless night, no more tapping is heard. At first light, they emerge cautiously from the ship. There is no sign of the things they heard outside, until Susan finds a small metal container near the side of the ship. They presume it has been dropped by one of the marauders. They open it and find it contains glass vials of what appears to be a drug. They stow it safely in the ship and start out for the city. The journey is uneventful, and they find the city fascinating. The streets are roofed, the shops are filled with foodstuffs that crumble at a touch. The buildings are more modern than those they knew on Earth, glass being widely used in design. Everything is intact and undamaged. The floors and roadways are made from a metal material. There are no steps anywhere, only sloping ramps. Doctor Who is excited. They make their headquarters in what appears to be a public building. Doctor Who directs each of them to go in a different direction and find, if they can, books or whatever replaced books. Doctor Who hopes to learn something of the history of the planet. Ian reminds them that they have come here to find water. Doctor Who agrees testily. They arrange to meet back at the starting point in an hour. We follow each of them and see something of their discoveries. One by one they return to the meeting place. First Susan and Ian, Then Doctor Who, but no sign of Barbara. Barbara is wandering through a hall of strange sculptures. As she walks, we see a lens in a wall turn to follow her movements. She walks down a corridor. As she turns out of sight, a door slides shut behind her. Outside, Doctor Who's party is growing more anxious. Barbara panics slightly as more and more corridors seem to lead to dead ends. Ian decides they must start to search for Barbara. Fear grows in Barbara when she turns back along a passage down which she has just come and finds it blocked off. She starts to run. Outside, the searchers enter a building calling Barbara's name. She hears nothing as she runs into another blank wall. In a frenzy of temper and fear, she pounds at the wall. Sobbing, she gives up and turns to return the way she has come, and finds to her horror that she is in a room. 4 blank walls with no indication of where she entered. She hears a slight whir of machinery, lurches slightly, and the room begins to sink. Her 3 companions are wandering through a building calling her name when Ian silences them. Far away, they hear an irregular ticking sound. They follow the sound and enter a room filled with scientific instruments. The ticking emanates from one of these. Ian identifies it as a type of Geiger counter. The needle is resting in a section of the dial marked Danger. Doctor Who now realizes what has happened on Skaro. It has been destroyed by an atomic war. Ian asks how the city could have survived, and they conclude that the attack was made with neutron bombs, a weapon that destroys tissue but not solid matter, kills the people and preserves the buildings. What is more to the point is that they have been exposed to a high level of radiation. Doctor Who admits to feeling unwell. Barbara feels a slight jolt, and the whirring noise stops. A door slides open in front of her, revealing a passage. She starts cautiously along it. She reaches a fork in the corridor and hesitates while deciding which to follow. Behind her, a panel opens and a pair of grotesque arms move out to encircle her. Above ground, Ian insists that Doctor Who return to the ship and take it to a period where Susan and the Doctor can be treated for radiation. Susan points out that the ship is out of action. Sheepishly, Doctor Who shows them the liquid fuse, which is in perfect condition. Ian suspected as much. However, this is no time for recriminations. Ian says he will stay and search for Barbara, while Doctor Who and Susan return to the ship. Reluctantly, they agree. Ian goes with them to the doorway of the building. As they turn to leave, they are confronted by 4 terrifying machine-like creatures. Ian tries to run for it. A weapon is pointed at him, and his legs crumple, temporarily paralyzed. Barbara is seated on the floor of a windowless room, sobbing, when she hears sounds outside. A moment later, Ian, Susan, and the Doctor are hustled in, and the door closed again. Like her, they have been searched, and belongings have been taken from them. Other than that, they are unharmed. Barbara tells them she is feeling unwell, and they explain to her about the radiation. Unless they get treatment soon, there is little hope. Doctor Who is taken away to be questioned by the leaders of the underground city. On the way, he notices a gigantic control room and hears the sound of thundering water. He learns that the people of the underground city are the Daleks, the descendants of the survivors of a neutron war 2,000 years before. The city below ground was prepared before the war to ensure the survival of a select group. The war was started by the people of the other hemisphere, the Thals. The Thals had depended for survival not on a vast underground shelter, but on an anti-radiation drug they had developed. This fact rings a bell for Doctor Who, and he remembers the files found outside the ship. The Daleks have always believed the files to be extinct. Until now, that is, for they presume that Doctor Who and his companions are Thals. He inquires about their fate, and is told that they are to be tried for the crimes of their forefathers against the Dalek people. Revenge still runs strong in the Daleks, and even after 2,000 years, they intend to punish the Thal people for the crime of starting the war. The trial is to take place after the Great Rain. Doctor Who learns that each decade there is a great rain on Skaro. After each, the radiation level drops sharply. After this rain, it should be low enough for the Daleks to start life above ground again. It would be precipitous, therefore, if their emergence were marked by the execution of the Thals. Doctor Who points out that unless they receive treatment quickly, they will not survive until the rain is finished. He begs that one of them be allowed to return to the ship to fetch the drugs, hoping against hope that the files are indeed the anti-radiation preparation that they need. Doctor Who is told that the matter will be considered, and is returned to the cell. They are all feeling the effects of the radiation poisoning, when later that night a Dalek comes to their room and tells them it has been agreed that one of them can go for the drugs, and that the child has been selected. Although frightened of the jungle and what it might hold, Susan is determined to go, despite the protestations and pleas that one of the adults be allowed to go. Eventually, Susan sets out. The thunder and lightning that precede the great rain make her journey through the stone jungle the more terrifying. She reaches the ship unmolested. Inside, she treats herself with the drug and, packing it up, prepares for the return journey. She is about to start when she hears the same eerie tapping as before. Back in the cell, the others are concerned for Susan. There is some abuse of Doctor Who for letting them in for this. They try to evolve an escape plan, but know that they would not be strong enough to carry it out. Susan, very afraid, knows that time is running out. Outside, the tapping continues. Taking her courage in one hand and a large spanner in the other, she steps outside. A half circle of figures stands back in the shadows, lit sometimes by the flickering lightning. Susan calls out and asks who they are. The answer comes back in a gentle human voice. They are what remains of the Thals. Always keeping in the shadow, the spokesman tells her that there are now fewer than 100 of them. The anti-radiation drug was not powerful enough to counter the intense radiation of the first 1,000 years after the war. Those who did survive produced mutations. Eventually, these mutations settled into a genetic pattern, and the race has become uniform. They are still ashamed of their malformed bodies. Susan moves closer, and in a sustained flash sees them fully. They are identical to the human race on Earth, but perhaps even more beautiful. She learns that they have lived from the vast stockpiles of food that were prepared before the war. Now, these stocks have almost run out. They need help if they are to survive, and the only people who can help them are the Daleks. The Thals tell her that it was not they who started the war, but the Daleks. Susan says she will tell the Daleks of their plight, and now she must return to the city with the drugs. She learns that the drugs were left by intent, the Thals knowing that the radiation would affect them. As the rain starts, they give her a cape. They escort her to the outskirts of the city and leave her, saying that if the Daleks wish to help, they can leave a message outside the city gates. Susan reaches the cell and administers the drug. She tells the others that she was questioned on her return by the Daleks and told them of her meeting with the Thals. Later that day, a Dalek visits them and says a message has been sent to the Thals inviting them to come to the city and collect food when the rain has ended. Susan is not so pleased when the Dalek adds that not only will food be waiting, but guns. They intend to eliminate the Thals from the face of the planet and ensure, he says, that no war will ever happen again. The time travelers are recovering quickly and realize that they must warn the Thals of the treachery. They plot to escape. They are convinced that the suits worn by the Daleks are powered by electricity drawn up through the metal floor. The eye of the suit is a television lens on a flexible shaft. The suit has no legs, the base being mechanized for movement. Ian points out that the Dalek that brings their food never actually enters their cell. First, then, they must lure him in, then immobilize him. As the plan develops, Ian notices the plastic cape that the Thals gave Susan when the rain started. This he takes from her, and to her surprise, tells her to scrape the mud from her shoes. He directs the others to do the same, then he starts to explain his plan. When the Dalek brings their food, Susan is sitting on the floor near the opening of the door. The moment it starts to slide open, she slips a small piece of metal, taken from the drug box, into the runner. The Dalek orders them to take the food, which they do. The plastic cape is laid on the floor near the door. The Dalek pushes the control outside the cell, and the door starts to slide shut. It clicks violently as it bulks against the metal in the runner. The Dalek tries to switch again, with the same result. He opens the door again, and his flexible eye moves down to the runner. This is the cue for action. Barbara, who has been kneading the mud from their shoes into a muddy paste, slaps it over the lens with a splosh, blinding the creature. At the same instant, Ian and Doctor Who grab its sides and pull it forward. It struggles violently and throws them off, and unseeingly lurches forward onto the plastic cape. This insulates the machine from its power source, and it becomes helpless. Ian moves quickly to open the machine. He is revolted by the creature he finds inside, and tells the two girls to look away. With the aid of Doctor Who, the creature, helpless out of its machine, is pushed into a corner. With difficulty, Ian climbs into the machine suit. Then, with the others ahead of him, they start out of the cell along the corridor. We get a glimpse of the frog-like animal that is a Dalek as it lies, unable to move, in the cell. Susan leads the way, remembering the path she was taken before she went back to the ship. Outside the formidable steel door is a Dalek on guard. Ian speaks to him, imitating the strange metallic voice of the Daleks. He says that the prisoners have to be taken up to the 4th level. The guard doesn't doubt him, and the doors slide open. The prisoners move inside. There is a lift at one side of this chamber. The door slides shut, and Doctor Who slams home some bolts. Ian tries to free himself from inside the suit, but one of the interior locking nuts is twisted tight. At that moment, they hear alarm bells starting to sound. Ian screams at the others to get in the lift. They try to help him, but he pushes them towards it. He will not allow them to stay with him, and the suit is too bulky to allow them all into the lift at the same time. He forces them in and starts the control for the top. As the lift vanishes upward, there is a hammering on the door. Ian struggles to free himself. A voice outside orders that the cutters be used. Slowly, an arc of molten metal appears on the door as they cut into it. The others in the lift reach the surface and quickly send the lift back down. They watch the indicator needle. Below, the door is almost cut through. It falls with a crash, and we see, from the Dalek's viewpoint, Ian's stolen suit in the middle of the chamber. Instantly it is fired on with heat guns, and the suit bursts into flame. The Daleks enter and approach the suit cautiously. Then we discover that it is empty. The lift indicator is nearing the top. A Dalek speeds towards the controls to halt it. Above ground, the open-fronted lift is just appearing, much to the joy of the others. But before it can reach full ground level, the Dalek reaches the control and it starts to descend. Ian is dragged from the lift with inches to spare. There is still no time to waste, as the rain has stopped and the Thals are heading for an ambush. Cautiously, the escapers make their way through the building. They see the food piled on the floor and hiding around armed Daleks. They scream a warning to the Thals as the first of them appears in the doorway. In the resulting confusion, they make their escape and join the Thals at the ship in the jungle. At this meeting, Doctor Who and the others learn something more of the Thal people. They are dedicated to end killing, and even if it means their extinction, they are determined that they will not attack the Daleks. Ian tries to fire them with a desire for survival, but they explain that the race memory of such a cataclysmic war has erased all instinct to fight. The Thals tell them to go on their way. This is not their problem. With really no alternative, the time travellers agree. They move back to the ship when suddenly Doctor Who remembers. The liquid fuse. It was taken from him by the Daleks when he was searched, and now lies in the city from which they have just escaped. Now, reasons Ian, their problem is the same as the Thals. They must join forces if they are to survive, and to survive, they must get back into the city. The Thals agree on the condition that there is no killing. These people are not lacking in courage or compassion. They start to plan. Doctor Who believes that the whole city is powered from the central control room he saw during their captivity. The power for the lifts, the movement machines, the air intakes, in fact everything that makes the city work, is centred in that room. This, says Doctor Who, is the brain of the city. Ian expounds the theory that the most vulnerable area to attack is the one considered by the defenders to be the most invulnerable. They consider the lifts and the air intakes, but suspect that these will be heavily guarded. Doctor Who asks the source of the water he heard in the city. This comes, he is told, from the lake behind the mountain that backs the city. But there is no hope of reaching the city from that area. It is invulnerable. Then that must be where they attack, says Ian. The Thals are horrified. The lake, they say, is filled with frightful marine life mutated into monsters. They will face dangers not only from the Daleks, but also from the amphibian creatures that swarm the swamps around the lake. Even more reason for making this area the area of their attack, says Ian. The Daleks will never expect an attack from this area. The Thals are not convinced, as they are certain there is no access to the city this way. However, they will go along. Doctor Who is in favour of taking a large force, but Ian opposes this, maintaining that a small mobile force can work more effectively. After more discussion, it is agreed that Ian will head this force, taking 6 Thal men with him. Susan, Barbara and the Doctor will remain near the city with the rest of the Thals. Ian sets a date by which, if he is going to succeed, he'll be ready to move into the city. Doctor Who must mount a diversionary attack on that date. Ian's group prepares to move out when Barbara joins him. She insists on being in on this, and no amount of protesting will change her mind. Her motives would be hard to define. Ian's welfare, love of adventure, or the very good-looking Thal going with them. They set off, and Doctor Who settles down to wait and study the old books and records of the Thals. The swamp that borders the lake is as dangerous and uncomfortable as the Thals predicted. A land of mist. The camp beside the lake frightens Barbara beyond words. The terrible sounds of the marine creatures. Leeches like octopuses that seem to lurk in every pool. Any attempt to sleep is wasted. A Thal who goes down to the water's edge at dawn is remembered only by the scream he leaves behind. In daylight, Ian examines the cliff face that walls one end of the lake. The tunnels that take the water into the underground city are fractionally below the surface of the flooded lake. The water rushes down the tunnels with great force, and it is obvious that no entry can be made that way. Above the waterline, Ian can see a honeycomb of caves and fissures. He decides to explore these in the hope that they will lead deep into the mountain, and perhaps into the city. A difficult and dangerous traverse along the cliff face is necessary to reach them. To fall into the lake below would mean certain death, for the water writhes with black, shapeless creatures. The first few caves they examine extend 10 or 20 feet beyond their entrances. Ian is losing hope when Athal reports a cave that seems to go much deeper. This is the route they select, and they start their journey into the mountain. At the ship, meanwhile, Doctor Who continues his studies of the pre-war civilization. The equipment carried by the party in the mountain is hardly suitable for so arduous a journey. A flashlight from the ship, some candles and ropes made by the Thals. Ian is tempted to give up the attempt, but soon after the start he is robbed of the choice by a landslide that blocks their retreat. As they move deeper into the mountain, the heat starts to build, making the journey more uncomfortable. They edge along chasms that seem bottomless. At one point, Barbara is left to rest while the others go off in different directions to seek a route. In the darkness, beyond the weak light of her candle, she hears a slithering sound, and her own childhood nightmare is fulfilled when she sees the giant spiders, white and bloated, starting toward her. Later, Athal sacrifices himself by cutting a rope from which he hangs after a fall, and which threatens the lives of the others. A candle ignites a jet of natural gas, and its flame blazes intermittently across their path. A quick dash across its path as it subsides is the only way to pass, and there is no way to estimate its timing. An error, and the passer could be caught in the inferno. Every 100 yards provides a new terror, and the group faces these perils with no certainty that they will ever escape. Time is now against them, as the moment for Doctor Who's diversionary attack grows near. When all hope is lost, Ian makes one last exploration. He finds a narrow fissure through which he can hear the sound of water. The party creeps through and emerges into a great chamber where the water from the lake rushes through. Here they find stonework that channels the water, and they know they are near the city. Doctor Who prepares his attack. He plans to block off some of the air vents if he can, and generally make things uncomfortable for the Daleks. From the mountain, Ian and Barbara's group enters the city. Doctor Who, in his enthusiasm, gets captured by the Daleks with Susan and a few Thals. Ian's party, meanwhile, is making good progress. The Daleks do not intend to be cheated of their execution again, and Doctor Who and his group are taken to the Sonic Chamber, the Daleks' particular form of capital punishment. The victims are subjected to a rising level of decibels that become ultrasonic, driving them through madness to death. With particular venom, the Daleks prolong the agony as much as possible. Ian's attack is helped by the attention the execution is getting, and they are able to move forward with not too much difficulty. The final phase of the battle is entered when they reach the central control room. Here they are opposed most strongly. Outside the Sonic Chamber, the Daleks watch the growing agony of their victims. The Dalek at the control lever moves it toward the peak. Doctor Who and the others in the chamber are reaching the limit of endurance when the sound stops. The Dalek travel machines become lifeless. The lights fail. Ian has succeeded. The vanquished Daleks are being treated with compassion by the Thals. Discussions are held to find a way by which both races can survive in peace. The Thals mistrust the Daleks rightly, as is proved later. During this time, Doctor Who studies the records of the Daleks and compares them with his earlier study of Thal records. A Dalek reports seeing 2 unaccountable blips on the space radar. This is given little attention. Using the freedom given them by the Thals, the Daleks launch a counterattack on the control room. Doctor Who halts the battle with the announcement that he has discovered from the records that neither the Thals nor the Daleks were to blame for the war. Both hemispheres were destroyed simultaneously, and there is evidence that before the attack, the radar had recorded something in space. Now, again, the planet is being approached by an unknown force. The prospect of attack from an outside agent provides the best possible unifying motive for the Thals and the Daleks. Together, they prepare to meet the new invaders, knowing that if they survive, they can coexist on their planet. Jointly, they plan their defense as the rockets move closer to the planet. Doctor Who's party, having recovered the vital liquid fuse, can now leave when it wants. When Doctor Who suggests this to his companions, the idea is rejected violently. They have been through a great deal and intend to see this through. The rockets land and the invaders advance on the city. A group of Dalek skirmishers fire on the attackers and find their weapons have no effect whatsoever. The space people seem to be protected by an invisible shield. They appear to be invulnerable. It is Doctor Who realizes that the invaders, despite the most violent aggression from the Daleks, have not returned fire. Despite the fears of the others, Doctor Who advances on the invaders unarmed and attempts to make contact. Carefully, the space people emerge, and Skaro learns the final truth. These people come from the planet that 2,000 years earlier fired neutron bombs on Skaro. Since that time, their own civilization has progressed, and they have realized the enormity of the crime committed by their forefathers. They have waited for the radiation level to fall, and now they come to make reparations and assist in rebuilding the planet. With Skaro's safe future assured, Doctor Who and the others leave for new times and distance.